So my name is Djangocon. I'm going to be talking about how to kind of make running a user group as easy as humanly possible. So we'll start off with just who the hell am I? As I said, my name is Djangocon. Most relevantly, I co-organize the Django NYC group. We're probably one of the larger Django user groups around. This guy's my co-organizer. We'll talk more about him lately. And I actually get paid working at this place. We're an interactive agency. We basically make websites for big companies like ABC, JetBlue, a bunch of names like that. IKEA and a few other European companies as well. And we're hiring. So if you're looking for a job, come talk to me later. I'm also involved in planning the US version of this. So if you want to do anything involved with that, come talk to me later. And again, not related to this talk, but I'll be talking more about that later. So user groups, why do we care about these? They give us a few different things. This has to be probably one of the more awesome user groups. I have no idea what it's for, but you do a search for user groups on Flickr and it comes up. So they provide us locality and physicality, especially for open source communities where we interact with people all over the world, which is awesome. But it also kind of sucks in that interaction happens over email and IRC for the most part, and they're not exactly the most expressive mediums. So it's really kind of a meaningful and powerful thing to actually be able to physically be present with fellow members of your community. They also provide idea sharing. This kind of happens in two forms. One's education and learning, as well as collaboration. Working on projects together. So, and finally, they provide socialization. A major part of community, aside from having a common interest, is actually, liking the people you're around and developing relationships with them. And user groups provide an excellent avenue for making this happen. So I'm going to be going into a bunch of specifics on how to get a user group going and keeping it running smoothly with as little effort as possible. The key to this is keep things simple. KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. Or stupid simple, depending on how you want to go with that. If you ever heard of like the lean startup kind of approach to businesses, a lot of the same idea. You never always do things. There's going to be a recurring theme of always do the simplest, easiest thing possible to accomplish a goal, and then basically, if that works, invest on that and then start doing the more complicated things or something that's more expensive or so on. So if you're looking to start a user group, the first thing you should do is look out and see if there's already one there. A lot of times, in all likelihood, there's something at least kind of related to what you're looking to form a user group around. And it's probably good to at least go check it out, talk to the people running it, see what the deal is. Aside from not wanting to step on other people's toes, which is usually a good thing in life, you might find that there's not necessarily enough need to start something else. If you do find another group that is kind of appropriate for what you were looking to do, volunteer. There's always stuff that needs to be done in user groups, whether it's speaking, whether it's negotiating with venues, if it's just telling people that stuff's happening. There's always help needed, so see what you can do. But if, let's say, you do that and you find that there's a niche which isn't necessarily being addressed, or there's some dysfunction in the current user group that you think you don't want to battle trying to fix internally, it may be appropriate to start a new one. So there's a few things you want to think about and figure out in that process. The most important in that is to think about what your audience is going to be. Kind of a corollary to that is kind of what's your group's focus going to be. The main kind of thing you're optimizing for here is to be sustainable. If you have a user group of 2 people, yes, technically that's a group, but it's probably not particularly interesting or worth the effort. Conversely, if you have a huge user group, like in New York, we have a group called the New York Tech Meetup, where it's like 3,000 to 5,000 people at an event. Running an organization like that is literally a full-time job, and probably more than you want to take on. So the you can really control that kind of size by controlling the scope of what your group is looking to focus on. The thing that's going to interact with that scope is generally going to be the population density of your area. So if you're, again, looking at some places like New York or Berlin or really high density place, you're probably going to want to go towards the more specific end of the spectrum, because, you know, if you have 8 million people living on a 5-mile long island, you probably have 10 people who have a similar interest as you, who are willing to, you know, take the half hour after work to come out to your group. Conversely, if you're in a small town or a less densely populated area, you're probably going to want to aim more for the broad end of the spectrum, just because there's less people, and there's only so far somebody's willing to drive to go to one of these things. So you can think about that. There's always exceptions to the rule. If your small, sparse town is Lawrence, Kansas, you're probably okay getting pretty specific. You know, and at the end of the day, you're probably going to have to experiment a bit. You can start off with just talking to people. A lot of times, like if there isn't necessarily a Django group in your area, there probably is already a Python group. Go to a few of their meetings and see how much interest there is in Django. Certainly once you start the group, as long as you're not super specific in your name, you can probably move around with the scope a fair amount after you get going to see how stuff goes. So once you figure out what you actually want to do, you need to think about the kind of events you want to run. I suggest initially a social event is probably a good starting place. It's a lot easier to organize. You don't need to find somebody to talk. There's a lot less pressure around it. It's a lot easier for people to kind of come and get to know, and it's a good way to help you find a feel for what your local community, you know, what the people in your community are interested in, as well as just what interest level there is. From there, you kind of move on to a more standard format, if you will, of talks, something like what I'm doing right now. I'll get a bit more in depth on what works for them, at least that I found. And then finally, you have to find a venue. For the social kind of events, bars and restaurants work well. Particularly anything with a really long table or long tables tend to work well for these kind of events. For more talk style things, if there's any local tech companies or startups, they're usually pretty interested, assuming that their facilities can support it. In doing these kind of things, it provides them with really, really cheap recruiting mechanism, as well as kind of improving their brand recognition within a technical community. If that's not an option, libraries and community centers often would be interested in hosting these kind of events. Additionally, co-working spaces. If you're not familiar with co-working, the idea is kind of you go and rent a desk at a place, but it's more of a, in addition to just getting the desk and the internet connection, you have a bit more of a community and a social environment than something like, I forget the name, Regis, I think, is one of the companies where you just rent a cube, and it's very much like working in a cube farm. But for them, similarly to the tech companies, it's a way they feel to grow their community, as well as really, really cheap promotion. So once you have ideas for a venue, you need to take a few steps. You want to talk to somebody at the venue before you show up, especially if you have more than like 10 people. Shockingly, showing up to a restaurant with 40 people, while they'll be happy to have the business, might piss some people off. It's also a great opportunity to start building a relationship with the people at the venue. A lot of the stuff that makes running a user group really easy after you get going is building relationships. There we go. So specifically on that topic, there's a few things you can do that are really, really low effort, but go a really long way to help building and maintain those relationships. Most importantly of that is saying thank you. It takes not even 2 minutes to write a thank you email or call somebody and say thanks after you run an event at their space. And it really helps to both keep your group in their mind as well as just to give them some positive feedback. And you know, if you make somebody feel good, they're going to be happy when they see you again. If you kind of cause them pain, they're not going to be happy when they see you again. Similarly, along that vein, clean up after yourselves. It's again kind of obvious stuff, but you know, if you go to use somebody's space and you'd leave the place looking like a war zone, they're probably not going to be interested in having you back. So you don't have to leave things, spotless, but try and leave it more or less in the state you found it. And then finally, have a schedule and do your best to stick to it. A lot of times, the people who will be hosting your events were probably, if it's a tech company, there's somebody from that company who has to stick around while your group's there to keep the lights on. And they probably want to go home and, have dinner. So make sure that if you say you're going to be there from 7 to 8:30, try and be out there by 8:30. Again, it's a lot of common sense stuff, but it's just, it's easy to let it slip. Kind of related to venues, you'll probably start thinking about sponsors fairly early in this process. For the most part, don't worry about getting them. You don't really need them. A lot of times, you can view your hosting, your venue, as your initial sponsor, especially if you're not paying them for the space. If you do start looking at sponsors or have people who are interested in doing sponsorships of your group, look for what's called service in kind. The idea is basically look to get things, not money. So if somebody wants to sponsor you, tell them buy the pizza, or offer us a space, or give us books. Once money gets involved, there's a whole giant pile of work, liability, and responsibility, and ethics that generally going to be more work than you want to deal with. So avoid dealing with money whenever possible, and look for service in kind. Kind of, again, slight rat hole, but one form of sponsor that is really easy is book publishers. Both O'Reilly and A-Press have really easy, just, once you form your group, go to their website and sign up and tell them what books you're interested in. Every month they'll send you some books and just ask that whoever you give them to, that you ask them to review the books. Other publishers, I'm sure, have similar programs. So once you get all that done, you want to start thinking about promotion, because, if nobody knows about your event, nobody's going to show up. And one of the easiest forms of this is meetup.com. I'll talk more about them later, but they tend to be a little US-centric just because they're a New York and US-based startup, but as far as talking to some people online, they seem to be reasonably popular over here as well. But once you create your group on Meetup, they'll actually, as part of that process, you'll say, people who are interested in Python, Django, web programming, whatever, you give them a list of topics, would be interested in my group. So they'll email virtually everybody who signed up in your region who would be interested in those topics. So you're usually getting access to usually a couple thousand people that, for no effort. Certainly Twitter and Facebook are pretty easy tools, especially if you can get the attention of prominent people within the area you're focusing on. It's a pretty easy way to get the word out. And yeah, so that's kind of the easiest parts of promotion. There's more you can do later on, but that's really the easiest starting place. So that's most of what you need to get started. Obviously, once you get there, though, you really have to kind of try and keep your momentum up. Like most things in like if going to a gym or studying or anything else, if you can just keep doing something, a little bit every week or every day or whatnot, it's going to be a whole lot easier than if you drop it for 2 months, and then try and deal with that backlog. One of the key things to keep in mind as you're doing all this is it's all about the people in your membership. Obviously, if they're not feeling a benefit from things, they're going to stop showing up. But also, that's really the point. So really keep in mind, try and keep feedback from them. Also, think about doing stuff that may not necessarily be they might seem kind of corny sometimes, but sometimes go around and do the name game. Just have everybody say who they are, who they work for, where they do, what's their favorite Python package, stuff like that. It can seem kind of silly, but it can go a long way about kind of keeping the focus where it should be. And to kind of beat a dead horse, be lazy. If you're starting to do something with your group, and you go, wow, this is really more work than I want to do, it's probably too much work and you're probably not going to do it. So always try and figure out what's the minimal way you can get something done. A key part of that is don't reinvent the wheel. A lot like in programming, somebody's probably solved, at least in some form, the problem that you're having. So if your gut instinct of, I have this problem, let me go build something to solve it, you should check yourself, because it's probably, again, more effort than you need. Key to this is, again, and they don't pay me anything for saying this, but it's meetup.com is really a fantastic resource for running user groups. A whole lot of the administrative just grind that you have in running a user group, they take care of. You basically set it up, you get a web page, which is decent. That includes a calendar that users can subscribe to. It includes a RSVP system. It includes a mechanism for collecting money if you need to, which, again, you should avoid, but they provide it, which is nice if you need it. They do email reminders. They provide mailing lists and forums. And it's just a whole bunch of stuff that you literally fill out one form, and it's all done for you. You don't need to do stuff. So really, I think it's like $12 US a month for 3 user groups, so it's probably like 8 or 9 euros. It's really just, I can't speak more highly of it. Eventually, you may outgrow it, but try it first and figure out if it's going to meet your needs. And worst case that happens is it doesn't meet your needs, and you understand exactly what your needs are that you need to address. Another thing to keep in mind going forward is be open. If somebody comes up to you with an idea for your group, that's fantastic. It means, A, that they care enough and have enough interest in your group to actually put thought and energy into it, and really try and take advantage of that energy. Kind of related to that is be very willing to delegate stuff. As a creator of something, you have most people have a strong instinct to try and run everything themselves and just just because I don't necessarily trust somebody else to do it the right way, right? But similarly, like I was saying, if somebody comes up to you with an idea, let them, say, okay, great. I may not have the time to do it, but if you want to do it, run with it. Or maybe see what you can do to help them. Kind of like enable and check in. So one thing that happens a lot is once you get up and running, it can be really easy for you to just get space for something. If you just know 2 weeks in advance, I need a space for 30 people, okay, I have relationships with 2 or 3 places where I can make that happen. But I don't necessarily have the time to figure out and do all the planning for actually organizing an event beyond that. So if you have members who have expressed interest in helping out or had an idea for an event, go to them and say, hey, I'll get the space set up for you, but I need you to take care of everything else. It's a great way to develop more activity within the group, and it also then really lost my train of thought. So it really helps keep people engaged, but make sure to just check in on them every so often. We're all pretty busy people. It's easy to let something go by the wayside. So just pester them periodically. Just make sure everything's on track, and if not, maybe take some corrections. Another thing that I'd very strongly recommend is find a co-organizer. This is Justin Lilly. He's my co-organizer. It's a great thing for again, maintaining the sustainability of a group. Everybody's going to have some period of time where you're just going to get slammed with a ton of stuff from work or have some kind of personal issues going on, and you're not going to be able to give the group all the attention it needs. By having a co-organizer, it's relatively unlikely that you're both going to get taken out at the same time. So this way, the group can kind of keep on going. You can keep your momentum going, but you don't have the dependency of one person. To this end, kind of like I was saying with venues, it's really important to develop relationships. And this is coming from somebody, I'm probably like a lot of people in this room, not the most socially capable person in the world. But especially the relationships of this kind, they're fairly easy to maintain. A lot of us just make sure you give people a bit of attention, a bit of respect, and a bit of responsibility, and just stay in touch with them. Just ping them once a month, and just say, hey, what's up? Just want to make sure everything's still cool. And again, it's this magical thing will start to happen where if you're able to figure out who's interested in doing stuff and give them some responsibility, they'll start doing your work for you, which is really where you want to get in life. So when you figure out what you need help with, either if it's people to give talks, if it's help organizing events, whatnot. You kind of need to take two approaches to finding those people. One is general appeals. So at the beginning of a meeting, usually you might have some time to take care of administrative tasks, and kind of in the format like this, just make a general announcement, hey, we're looking for somebody to talk, whatnot. But a lot of times you can get fairly limited responses for that. A lot of times it's not enough to actually spur somebody into action. So a lot of times it's a good thing to mix this with specific invitations. If you know that one of the members in your group is working on some awesome Django app or pluggable app, go to them and say, hey, would you want to do a talk on your app, just personally on the side, send me an email or something. A lot of this times, while it may even be the word for word what you said at the beginning of the meeting, the fact that you're targeting specifically at somebody goes a long way in kind of giving them the motivation to step up and help out. Kind of like I was saying, don't be afraid to reach out to people. The worst thing that can happen is they'll say, no, I'm not interested or I'm not available. And this applies to pretty much everything related to the group. If you need help with some aspect of running the group, if you need people to speak, if you're looking for new venues, if you're looking for new ideas, always don't be afraid to reach out to people and ask. Another important thing is always to be very clear about and explicit about what you expect of people and what they should expect of you in return. An example of this is at Django NYC, we record all of our talks. But that introduces certain complications in the AV setup. So as part of that, we ask speakers to use a laptop that we provide to do their presentation so that we don't have to deal with what I was doing before, messing around with the cables and whatnot. So we're very careful to make sure that when we have somebody lined up to talk, that we tell them up front, hey, we have this set up, we expect you to do it this way. But we're also going to make sure that that's going to be solid and be there and be ready. Similarly, for any kind of sponsors or venues, say, hey, we're looking to use the space, we'll need just a projector and seating. As part of that, though, we'd also be happy to have you come up and speak for 5 minutes. Just be clear and make sure everybody's on the same page as far as who's expecting what out of everybody. And don't leave people waiting. It's pretty easy to let an email sit in your inbox for a few days and then a few weeks and then, oh, hey, look at that, it's a couple months old. But that really is a really easy way to just kill relationships for no good reason. So just make sure if somebody sends you a message, even if it's just a 5-second reply of, hey, I got this, I'm working on it, I'll let you know. Just make sure you stay in touch with people. It's one of those funny things where the individual actions to do this are very easy and very quick, but it takes a certain amount of willpower to do it consistently. And make sure you follow through with things. If you say you're going to do something, do it. It's pretty easy both to kill relationships and just kill a user group by constantly saying, oh, we're going to do this thing, we're going to do this thing, we're going to do this thing, and never have it happen. So make sure if as soon as you say you're going to do something, make sure that happens or you have a very good reason for why not. Another thing to keep in mind with groups is be willing to let things fail. By that, I certainly don't mean if you try something and it's a little difficult and a little awkward, just give up on it. But if you try something a couple times, you try a few variations, and it's very clearly not working, don't beat the dead horse. Let it go and find something new. Be consistent. This can take a few forms with user groups. Probably the most significant of which is try and have your meetings happen at a common time every month. Let's say like the third Wednesday. This isn't always possible given constraints as far as venues and whatnot, but the more you can do it, the easier it is for everybody in the process to plan. If I know it's the group is meeting the third Wednesday of every month, I can make sure that's clear on my calendar. I can make sure the venue can know in advance that's when they need to be there. So it just makes life easier for everybody. And once again, this is the core of everything. Look for opportunities that are high impact and low effort. nobody's getting paid in this whole thing. So if they have to do too much work, and then if I have to do this huge amount of work and the payoff is tiny, nothing, I'm going to lose any and all motivation to do this. I'm not going to just do it because I'm getting a paycheck, because I'm not. So really look for opportunities for things that you can do that take a minimum amount of work to organize, but really get people excited and provide benefit for people. Some examples of things, and I'll get into some details on these later, but some examples of events that we found really fit into this category are tutorials and hack nights. These really take fairly little for us to set up, but they're immensely beneficial to our membership. So kind of get into details of finally specific things that you can do in your user groups. Regular meetings, so usually we find the format kind of similar to this works well. To have talks on specific topics, almost generally speaking, the more focused and specific, the better. It kind of helps keep stuff from meandering and getting boring. And keep it to 30 to 40 minutes. It's kind of a time frame we found that if things are focused enough, you can dive pretty deep in that time, but people also aren't going to get bored out of their mind and go crazy. Also, generally, user groups tend to happen in the evening, and people are probably hungry and want dinner, so don't keep them around for too long. But also, keep in mind you probably want to mix things up every so often. If you just have somebody standing here talking all the time, people still can get kind of bored. Some alternatives that are pretty easy are panels and Q&A sessions. If you have some people with a few people who have relevant experience in a certain area, ask them to just kind of talk, and then Q&A sessions also similarly. It's especially if you have a lot of newer users or a mix of new and experienced users, it's a pretty good way to try and see what people are interested in and give people opportunity to ask questions that they may not always be able to answer. Another thing to think about as a possibility is interviews. Try and keep an eye on people in your space, prominent people in the space you're focusing on, traveling through your area. Django specifically, a lot of the core devs or prominent people within the community travel around a lot, so there's a decent chance they'll be in your area at some point and say, hey, would you be interested in coming and just talking to our group? So keep that in mind. Lightning talks are also a great way to mix things up in your group, do something a little different. It also provides a great entry point for people to become more active participants in the group. So those of you who are not familiar, just out of curiosity, anybody not familiar with, or who's familiar with lightning talks, what they are? Okay, so a few hands down. So lightning talks are, the idea they're 5-minute talks. That's a hard time limit. Yell at people if they go over it. No Q&A. And they can be on any topic. Kind of no bounds kind of thing. The goal with them is that they're very easy to prepare. They're very low barrier to entry. So it provides a great way for people to get in, start participating in the group in an active way. Also get into public speaking. It's not necessarily a natural skill for everybody, so it provides a lot of opportunities. And kind of with that any topic goes clause, if you will, it provides a lot of opportunity for kind of interesting things that somebody necessarily couldn't spend 40 minutes talking about, still throw out there and get some interesting things going. And always try and have some kind of social component to meetings. Usually this most easily done by before or after the meeting, saying, hey, for anybody who's interested, we're going out to the bar around the block or the restaurant around the block for dinner. Feel free to come join us, have a few drinks, talk. Like I was saying before, it's really kind of a key component of a healthy user group is building a community just by talking and getting to know the people around you. And beer and food are usually pretty good ways to do that. Some other events that we run that work really well are tutorials. These we've actually found web-based, ironically, for a physical thing, work really well. So what we'll do is have a space where everybody has internet access, point them at the Django tutorial or some tutorial we post online, tell them to get started on it, and then have a number of people available to help out and answer questions. This really works well for a few reasons. One is it maximizes the amount of stuff that we can, existing resources that we can reuse. I'm not terribly interested in putting in the amount of effort in writing a tutorial. It's a huge amount of work if you ever tried to do one well. And there's lots of good ones out there already, so it lets you leverage that. And it also takes care of a lot of the problems you have in a lot of kind of teaching situations where everybody's going to need to go at their own pace. So if you're trying to go step by step, you're going to have half the group kind of pissed off because they want to move on and are getting bored, and the other half is completely lost and doesn't know what's going on. This lets everybody go at their own pace, and it works out well. Similarly, hack nights. So these kind of developed because we originally just tried to have, actually the tutorials kind of became a spin-off of these hack nights. The idea is everybody just comes to a space that we provide. There's some pizza, there's some beer, some soda, and works on projects, asks questions if they need it. But we had this kind of funny thing develop in that all the more advanced members of the group just spent all their time answering the questions of the newer users, which wasn't inherently a bad thing, but it was frustrating for the more advanced users because they can never actually get work on their own projects done because they were always answering questions. So by kind of separating the events for the different target audiences, we were able to, we keep the hack nights for, we kind of have the constraint of you have to come with a project to work on. That kind of self-selects for a group of more advanced members who, occasionally will ask questions, but for the most part, they're working on showing off what they're doing. And then the tutorials are available to offer help to the more newer users. Kind of a last thing here that we've done is do recordings of our talks. And this is kind of a great example of this thing I've been harping on, of find the easiest possible thing, and then if it works well, invest more in it. So initially we recorded talks by I had Snaps Pro on my Mac. It's a screen capture program. I started it going and gave a talk. It was recorded, threw it up on Vimeo. Well, that was easy. And we got a lot of good feedback about that. So we started, add more to the process. We maybe found some more professional tools for doing the capture, doing a little bit of editing to make the videos a bit better, and now, investing in like an actual good omnidirectional mic so you can hear the audience and the speaker. So again, it's just a process of find the easiest thing, and then based on feedback, invest more, because you do have very significant resource constraints. I don't know why that's in there. I guess this was originally intended for certainly for the social events. You can do all sorts of things, but usually the easiest thing is just choose a meal. Usually meals are already a very familiar and common and easy social environment for people. So just choose one and say, hey, we're going to be at this restaurant for dinner. Come join us. So kind of reiterate and close up in summary. Keep things as simple as possible, and invest as you can. Build relationships. Kind of the more cynical way of looking at this is find people to do your work for you. But really, it takes a little bit of effort to keep them going, and they really, that's an investment that really pays back well. And seriously, just use meetup.com. This is a room of web developers. I understand that every problem looks like 5 tables and a couple views. I promise you it's not. Really, just use Meetup, and if it becomes a bigger problem, deal with it then. And these are just credits for all the Flickr photos. So any questions? Oh yeah, the mic's there for...
Yeah, okay. Comment and question, follow-up.
Sure.
The comment is, I don't know how many, you mentioned hack days as a way of getting an event that people actually tie around. As an interesting little historical note, and to throw something into that, I don't know how many of you realise the Oracle backend, database backend for Django was started as a community project. It was basically the Boulder users group that decided that they were going to do it, mostly because I think they had a couple of guys from the same company that had an interest in it. They worked on that as a project, came to us originally and said, are you interested? We said yes. The core said yes, that is. And then about 6 months later, they said, over a core period of refinement, came up with something, and they're sort of Matt Waite and Ian, name is completely escaping me, are now continually maintaining that. So that is another project, another way of looking at it. Not necessarily something that needs to be contributed to Django, even if it's a reusable app or some common area that you can contribute to the community. That is something you can do as a users group that may be a way of binding you all together. The question that sort of stems out of that is there anything that the Django Core, the Django Foundation, or whatever, could be doing to make the sort of things that you're talking about easier? I mean, you say obviously use Meetup. We have Django People as well as a sort of a parallel resource. Again, completely agree, it's not just a matter of 5 tables and a bunch of views, but there are things that are in Meetup that aren't in Django People, and things that are in Django People that aren't in Meetup. In particular, I'm thinking that, looking at my hometown, and I'm thinking about starting up a users group in Perth, there are 3 people registered as interested in Django People, a Django users group in Perth, and I personally know about 20, none of whom are in Meetup, and only half of which are on Django People. So,
right,
what could we be doing?
So I think there's a few things, I guess. One of them is, I think, something that I don't know if it's the DSF, if it's just Django Core, or just what we do with the Django website. I think there's a lot of opportunity there to provide more discovery resources. This is both, I think, this certainly applies to, as you're saying, just letting people know that something like Django People exists. And maybe even pulling in some information from that. But kind of similarly, providing something for reusable apps, or basically just, it's definitely something I've run into with a lot of new Django users is, while we certainly don't have a opaque community, it definitely isn't the easiest thing to figure out where all the different things are. I mean, you get to the Django project website, you probably find the user groups. If you're familiar with IRC, you probably find the IRC channel. But beyond that, it takes a while to figure out that Django People is there, that Django Sites is there, all the different resources. So I think probably the biggest opportunity to directly answer your question is enable more discovery there. There's probably also a few other things that have been discussed as far as possibly sponsoring people to go speak at groups, which would be neat, but isn't a super high priority, I'd say. And there's probably a few other things to maybe encourage collaboration between user groups. But yeah, I'd say the biggest thing is enabling the discovery. One thing I actually forgot to have in the slides that not really related to that, but triggered in my mind. A great way for both promotion and feedback is go talk at other user groups in your area. There's probably either groups with more broad interest or parallel interests to your group. Go talk to them and just either plug your group or say, hey, if anybody's interested, we exist. It's a great resource. So, thank you.
Okay, so thank you for your great talk, and I think you nearly mentioned everything one should keep in mind for building a user group, but I have 3 additions. One thing is you didn't mention hackerspaces, which is really a large movement in Europe and also in the US, and I think one should also look for a local hackerspace for a meeting up there. There is also a website, hackerspaces.org, where you can look for hackerspaces in your area. Second, I think it's also very good to use different channels for announcement of your meeting, like using social networks or Twitter or mailing lists, even of similar groups if they share interest. This is something I always had good things with. And the third thing is that sometimes it's good if the community is not that big to put things together. In my city, we don't have this large Django community, and so we the Django user group is part of the local Python user group, because we are not big enough to do a Django user group by ourselves.
Sure.
And this works well.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I definitely totally agree with the hackerspace thing. Thank you for bringing that up. I know in New York we have at least 2 or 3, and they're all pretty awesome people, at least in my experience. And they're usually very, very excited to have these kind of groups come in. I would similarly very much agree with the look for multiple avenues to announce things. Different people pay attention to different channels. So yeah, definitely try and, obviously don't be spammy about it, but make sure you put it out in a few different ways to try and capture all the different ways people might be looking for it. And yeah, the last thing you mentioned, a lot of that was definitely goes along with what I was talking about, is in terms of finding your audience and finding your fit. But that's definitely a great example of a possible option if you're in a smaller community, is see if maybe you can fit within an existing organization or group. And then the great thing there is you can often leverage a lot of those relationships that already exist with that group. So even if you find you can spin off a specific Django event for that group, they probably already have venue relationships or sponsor relationships that you can leverage for that, and an existing membership that you can talk to. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Anything else? Sure.
We've got a pretty active group in Israel. We've had 16 meetings so far. And just one thing you said about Facebook, it's not a lot. Some people really object to having a Facebook group and having the announcements in Facebook. I think it's kind of a bit of a problematic using closed garden.
Right. So to that end, and actually, so I'm not perfect about all the stuff I've said. I mess this stuff up all the time. In particular for Django NYC, I'm personally not much of a Facebook user, so I haven't actually motivated myself to set up a page on Facebook. But especially if you have members with those kind of concerns, I would treat Facebook just as another channel, but not as a central point. I would definitely agree as having like a Facebook fan page or group page as your central point for your group probably isn't the best idea. But it doesn't hurt to put out your meeting announcements out there in addition to everybody else. Because while you have certain members who object to the use of Facebook, there probably are people in your community who Facebook is their main way of getting that kind of news. So it's not necessarily a venue, a channel that you should ignore, but I definitely agree it's probably a bad place to make your central point in communication.
And one more point, we call the group PyWeb, because that's where you can get more people, basically, not just Django. There are two Burgers people in the meeting. So that's another idea to get more people involved and also make it more of a part of the Python community.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Thank you. Anybody else? No? Cool. All right. So if you have any other questions, feel free to grab me afterwards. I'll be around for the rest of the conference and the sprints as well. Or just hit me on Twitter or email me. I'm always happy to help fellow organizers out. So thank you.